like I'm usually pretty good at judging roster changes. I'm pretty good at like kind of gauging the temperature for when certain roster changes begin to form. But I have to be honest, I did not expect this move with the Rokkr and GodRX happening. I didn't. I think a majority of the community didn't expect this. I, for one, absolutely did not expect this. And it's kind of crazy to think about. Right? If we were to kind of reflect on the beginning of the CDL, the way things started for the Rokkr, and we were to kind of look at that trajectory and say, yeah, just a few months later, a star player, an MVP possible candidate, a top 4 team would be making this dramatic of a move. And we have to kind of go back quickly as well to the beginning of the Rokkr, the way that this team formed, because not many, if anyone, expected them really at all to be that great of a roster, right? You got some guys that you're bringing into this team, not a ton of success. When we talk about maybe prior history, listen, you get a number of different guys who are at times good. You have a few guys that have been great in terms of previous titles. But in comparison to the Chicago Huntsmans of the world, the Atlanta Phases of the world, the Optic Gaming, we're talking about on paper before the season, they were a team that got swept underneath the rug. And quickly, before the launch weekend, people were talking about this team saying, pretty good in online scrimmages. You know, this team kind of understands the game well. They're playing pretty decent, or at the level of what GodRX was going to play at after his performance at the end of Black Ops 4. Can he be a key piece for this roster? He started to kind of look like that. They began to kind of become into the top 4, top 5 team discussion pretty early. They were looking dominant in respawns. They had the dynamic duo of Alex and GodRX, which looked to be one of the best in the entire league. They were also one of the only teams that really made the Atlanta phase struggle. Granted, they weren't the overall kryptonite, but they had a close series. They later took them down. It was impressive, right? Like I said, GodRX at one point was my pick to be mid-season MVP. I said, at this moment, the way that this guy is playing, granted, he didn't have a championship at the time, and unfortunately never would, but at that point, I was saying he was my MVP. And I'm very careful about how I assign things like that. They looked like the roster that could win a title that nobody at the start of the season thought that they could. And all of it led up until this one point, what I called the breaking point for the Minnesota Rokkr, and it happened at the Dallas home series final versus the Florida Mutineers. Now to kind of give a little bit of perspective, if for those who have kind of thought, or rather kind of forgot about this particular series, everybody was picking Rokkr, right? Everybody and their mother was picking Minnesota Rokkr to win this series, and they deserved it, right? They deserved to be called the favorite coming in to this final. They were in what would now be back-to-back grand finals. They had just taken down the Empire 3-1. Assault was playing out of his mind, without question, his best event up until that point. The entire team was looking like they were at their very best, and Rokkr, they come through and they win the game 1 to hardpoint. It was close. I remember it was on Azir Cave like it was yesterday. And what happens next is they get dominated the remaining 3 maps. And that event for me, like I said, was the breaking point, because everyone was shocked, right? Everybody was shocked. Everybody thought this was going to be the Rokkr. Granted, Florida, they may kind of make this close. But I think not only did the fans think it was going to be, or rather, not only did the fans think that it was going to be the Rokkr that would walk away with this, but I'm pretty sure the team thought they had it in the bag as well. Because when you look at the history of this roster, the trajectory that they had, it was a matter of, can this be the one? And when you're a team that is constantly kind of disproving what everyone thought at the beginning of the season, which was that, you know what, top 6, top 8, probably around that region, the fact that they were going to win a championship and prove everybody wrong, and they were so close to doing it, that for me was the breaking point for this team. But it wasn't the final straw, right? It wasn't the final straw for the Minnesota Rokkr. Granted, you know what? Back-to-back second place finishes, it is not bad whatsoever. But time went on, right? Time went on with the Rokkr, and I'll say this. The final straw for me was at their own home series. And I say the final straw, meaning that for me should have been a major change within the team, right? A roster change, a role, whatever it may be. Something dramatic should have happened after the Minnesota home series. Because coming into that event, like I said, after the back-to-back second place finishes, they then finish top 6 and back-to-back events. At Florida, they get 3-1 by the Ultra. They get 3-0'd by the new look Subliners. At Seattle, they get 3-0'd by Chicago. And the rematch with OGLA after beating them in Game 5 previously, they get 3-0'd. This event was everything for the Rokkr, not only because it's their own home series, but based off of the current look of the season, it would have proved to them whether or not the start of the season was actually who they were, or if they were just fast learners, right? That was going to be kind of the proving ground for them at their own home series. Was that, granted, you got a very difficult group, but if you can play well, that not only proves to the community, but it proves to the players themselves that they were actually a great team and still could be a great team. I think I had a lot of kind of speculation coming into this event, talking on how this event was going to settle the debate finally. And like I discussed, they come into a difficult group with the Atlanta FaZe and Dallas Empire. They lose to Dallas, and they later lose to Seattle and finish top 8. Now, have to keep in mind, in the loss to Seattle, or rather after the loss specifically to the Empire, Alex gets taken out because of an injury. Exceed later steps in versus Seattle, and they lose. Now, the reason why I bring this up, not only because it's important to provide context, but also because I believe that injury delayed things for the Rokkr, right? Because it was believed coming into that event that the team was looking much better in scrimmages. There was a lot of hype in terms of coin flips and the way that they were starting to kind of turn things around a little bit. Alex comes away with the injury, and I believe that the team thought, what would have happened if Alex would have played, right? If Alex was at 100%, we would have surely got back to our regular form. And you can't really argue that, because what do you have to say otherwise, right? I mean, a 0.58, I think it was KD for Alex in the series versus the Empire. That's not Alex numbers, right? Just a month ago, he was averaging like a 1.1. That is not the same Alex. And I believe that event in specific delayed the roster move. And I have to admit, it kind of makes sense, right? It kind of makes sense why they delayed the roster move, despite how much I would have liked them to make the change. And I think, honestly, it probably should, or rather, I believe that it should still have happened. I get, in some ways, why the Rokkr decided to wait, and I believe that is why we are where we are right now. I think if Alex doesn't have an injury, I think if the Rokkr just manages to lose out, finish top 6 again, maybe they beat Seattle, or even if they were to lose to Seattle with the regular lineup, I think that this change would have happened then. And it's kind of crazy. And I actually have been talking about this. I've been thinking about this ever since the move happened. When I saw the change announced on Twitter, it was actually my wife who told me. She was like, GodRX is benched from the Rokkr. I was like, wait, hold on. What's going on? It's crazy to think about GodRX's performance months ago to where we are now. The fact that he's not going to be playing at Champs. Now, I want to clarify something. A lot of people are under the assumption that GodRX's level of play has decreased to the point where he's the worst player on the Rokkr, which is absolutely not the case, right? A 1.32 KD, which is absolutely unbelievable, to a 1.04, right? He went from a top 3, top 5 player, I think he was top 3 personally, to kind of a mid-tier player, right? And the hard part is how great he was playing then to become an average player stat-wise, right? It'd be different if he was kind of, I don't know, in terms of stats, if he wasn't as hyped up as he was, to kind of slowly starting to transition. But because of this swap to online, which the Dallas home series doesn't make any sense to me because Minnesota were online there, regardless, the hit that he's taken and the dramatic decrease from being so high up to now kind of being average, it's easier to see, right? It's easier to see. And it's crazy to me to think that this guy in GodRX is now not going to be playing at Champs. Now, the Rokkr video that was released from both the coaches, Saint and Reppin, I thought was pretty interesting. And they kind of hit on the fact that it wasn't primarily skill-based, right? It was kind of primarily based in terms of roles, which does make sense to me. They've got a slow AR already in Assault, and they can't really afford to have another, just kind of based off the way the pace of the game currently works, especially in respawns. They said the pacing of the team was off, and I agree that another SMG probably would help that. Now, do I agree with the move? Right, let's just get straight to the point. Do I agree with the move to bench GodRX at this point in the season? I don't. I think that the Rokkr should have instead change their identity as a team. Embrace who you are, right? Embrace the current 5-man lineup that you've got, because I get the reason for GodRX, right? But at the same time, I don't think that this was the best move that they could have made. Now, I'm not talking about players. I'm talking in terms of what the lineup specifically could have done. I believe the Rokkr should have changed their identity rather than the team makeup itself. What do you mean by identity? What I mean by identity is change the makeup of how this team operates, right? Change the way that you prefer in certain game modes. I think what the Rokkr specifically should have done, obviously, I'm not involved in the inner workings of the Minnesota Rokkr, and I'm not going to pretend to be. But what I think they should have done was change their identity as a lineup, meaning become a solid search and destroy team, right? Try to rely heavily on that game mode. You were a smart team at the start of the season. People have talked about constantly the only real guarantee that you can have in a lot of these tournaments is search and destroy, right? I mean, in terms of hardpoint, in terms of domination, take your pick from time to time. Search and destroy really is the most consistent mode. And if you can work on that, I believe that that really could have helped them out in the long run, right? Rely on that game mode, become more of a one respawn roster. We know how great they could have been in respawn previously. But I think as a team, with the makeup that you have and with how long it has been since this roster has been together, I don't think you break them up coming into champs. I don't, because GodRX was looked upon as, without question, the best player on this team. So you move him out, and now all of this falls onto Exceed, right? All of this kind of falls now onto the substitute player ahead of the last event of the season. Or you could say playoffs and then later into champs so they can make it there. But nonetheless, I like Exceed. I do. He's a very talented player. I like this guy a lot. Been following his career kind of pretty much since he started. He's a very fast SMG player. He was great with the SOG back in Black Ops 4. He's been playing under Rebel pretty much throughout the entirety of the year. Was kind of already a substitute player for the Rokkr. So I saw a few people kind of getting a little bit confused on social media saying, where exactly did this guy come from? Isn't the roster lock already in play? He has been a substitute pretty much since the very start of the season for Minnesota. Exceed as well in Black Ops 4 finished, I believe it was top 12 under Sicario, back at Black Ops 4 Champs with Tommy, Chino, Proto, and Lenny. Very, very good player. Has a lot of very raw talent. I think under the proper team, he could function very well. I think from a role standpoint, he makes sense. And I am never one to doubt a young player, but you have to be aware of the short time that he has to mesh with the rest of this team, right? You have to be aware of how this team is already formed, and now he has to kind of jump into this at the very last moment. Now, he has already played with the Rokkr as a sub back in the Minnesota home series, but still, let's be honest here, right? That was a very last-second thing. There was no real teamwork that kind of came into it. It was pretty much like, hey, Exceed, play Alex's role, right? Just do your very best to try and play like Alex. Obviously didn't pan out in the one series he really realistically had a chance to kind of play with them in. Now, I'll say this. I don't think a roster move over time will benefit this team. Now, if we're at the Minnesota home series, like I said, kind of the final straw for me, if we're at that event, I'm probably down to have more of a conversation about this. I probably am, right? Because I think GodRX is a fantastic player. I think he's probably one of the best players in the world, given the right circumstances, given the right meta. But if you really want to have this conversation in terms of changing dramatically the team, I think it needed to happen a while ago. I think keeping GodRX in and changing the team's makeup, the way they perform in game modes, would have dramatically helped them ahead of champs and probably should have been the way to go, right? I get the decision, but I think it needed to happen a while ago, and I feel like right now, it's not going to fully benefit the team the way that they would probably like. The talent that GodRX has, it's incredible, right? And you can't deny that just months ago, he was a top 5, if not top 3 player in the world. So it is crazy for me to justify coming into the final event of the year and say, you got to let this guy go, right? I get the pace. I get all of those things, but I think you had to work around it. I think you need to get everybody together and just tell them, listen, things have got to change, right? I know those conversations have probably already happened, but somebody need to press the refresh button, because I don't believe getting rid of your best player a few months ago is the key to making you a better team. I get it from a role standpoint. I get it in terms of all of those situations, but just internally for me, I don't think that it is going to be enough. I tweeted it and I stand by it. I respect the move from the Rokkr because I know for a fact this was not an easy decision for them to make, but I believe that the hard portion of this should have been done a while ago. As much as I think this actually could help them, I think waiting too long won't accurately portray the way that this move was meant to. I think it's going to take a while for me to kind of realize the fact that an MVP candidate just a few months ago will not be playing at Champs. It's hard to think about, but Rokkr, again, respect the decision, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy for a young guy to step in this quickly and have to be ready to go pretty much for a role that he does play, but he's going to have to step into a totally new environment, and I'm just not so sure how the Rokkr are going to be adjust. Now, one last thing before we kind of close out, one thing that I want to be aware of is that roster changes now work differently, right? When it comes down to franchising, people do have to realize this Minnesota team, they made a move for them, right? Because when we talk about professional sports, when we talk about esports in general, and this is probably a subject for another video, but regardless, I want to hit on it. You have to realize that in franchising, teams are going to do what is best for them. Previously, it didn't always work out like that, right? You didn't have substitutes readily available. Minnesota has to do what is best for them. So I understand the reason for why they're making this move. It's not as if I'm oblivious to the reason for why they're making it. I do critique it because I think that it should have been done a while ago, and I don't think that it's the best situation for them right now. But I do understand it, and teams and people have to be aware of the fact for why teams are making decisions like this, because they are going off of what is best for them. And now that substitutes are available and it is kind of all about the organization rather than the players that happen to represent an organization, for me, it makes the most sense. I kind of like the idea that the Rokkr were having, but again, I think it was just a little bit too late. I'm interested to see exactly how they kind of perform for the rest of the season, and I definitely do have a major highlight on Exceed for the rest of the year.